Okay.
I was working the emergency room in Church Point, Louisiana.
Oh, okay. A beautiful downtown Church Point.
It's a charming town. I really
Yeah,
liked it there.
sure. So I'm just reading my cliff notes here. You're a physician, medical school Tulane, 86 graduate, a researcher in theoretical evolution.
Hmm.
And so you have a biologist view on history and civilization, and you're working on for a couple of decades on a book. Am I correct that we're going to talk about?
Yeah.
Okay, but because of so many of the issues related to then I guess candidate Donald Trump and now President Trump, you decided to move it forward.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Exactly.
Now you also have a website. Is it bookscrounger.com?
Bookscrounger.com. I am the book scrounger, I guess.
Yeah, right, right. So let's first, if you don't mind, let's talk about the book. And let's see, I'll be putting up an image. So let's talk about your book. It's Kings, Conquerors, and Psychopaths, from Alexander to Hitler to the corporation. Racism, fascism, coercion, brutality. That's a mouthful.
Yeah, yeah, it is. As you noted, I've been working on the book for a couple of decades. It's a lot of the ideas started really with just a quote from the Black Panther of all people, Stokely Carmichael, who was criticizing Western civilization and says, all I can remember is that when Alexander found that there were no more people to slaughter, he sat down and wept. And there was something about it, I'm not quite sure, but I had a feeling that that was not unusual, that Alexander was not unusual in that. And then some years later, the modern European historian Eugen Weber gave a talk here at the university and hit on exactly that theme, that the great men of history weren't great men. They were narcissists, they were sadists, they were psychopaths, they were Machiavellians, they were just some of the most horrific and dastardly people who ever lived. I kept working on it, and I began looking at it from a biological standpoint, and wrote the book.
So is this something in the genes? The most pathetic genes get to be, the greatest leaders?
Wow, that's an excellent question, and it's a hard question. First of all, human genetic behavior is a big bugbear in a lot of liberal arts circles. It, genetics is equated with eugenics, which is equated with genocide, and they're not the same thing. We do have genetic behavior, but it's ruts, not rails. It doesn't control us, but it speaks to us, sometimes very loudly. If you have to sneeze, cough, go to the bathroom, or the one that I use in the book, if you're giving birth, something you and I will never have to suffer through, the mind just takes over. The genetic structure just takes over the body, and we do something. So there are definitely genetic aspects to psychopathy and narcissism. There are also some developmental aspects. We could go off into that, but the main thing is that when you look at the quote great men of history, and I look at Napoleon, I look at Caesar, I look at Alexander, but I look at many others besides.
Mhm.
They were horrible butchers. They held power because people feared them.
So, okay, so they held power, they gained power also by making sure that people fear them too, I would
Exactly.
imagine. Yeah. So what is it about fear that, say, would attract these people to impose fear upon their victims?
That's a really good question. Some of this is certainly tied up. We can see some of the same things in animals. I often am struck by how narcissistic our cat is. She shows a lot of the same characteristics. In my area of biology, we're not so much worried about why it happens, but that it happens and where's the payoff. Uh, why did it work once it happened? And it works because this horrible man binds people together, creates some efficiency, but mainly just creates economies of scale, and he can overwhelm his enemies and then go attack more enemies. With time, the strategy spreads genetically, culturally, whatever, and you have these horrible men fighting each other, and that has been pretty much the 10,000 years of history of civilization.
So would you place more of a responsibility on just the culture, the climate of the time, or upon, I know we talked about this a few minutes ago, or upon the genetics? I remember seeing that show about the triplets. It was on CNN, and from what I could gather, obviously genetics played an incredible role, but the real determinant factor, at least according to their show, I think was the environment.
That's a really good observation. One of the men who helped me with this book a great deal, I've never met him, is James Fallon. He's a neurologist. He's not the comic. And he wrote the book, The Psychopath Inside. This is a man who's highly respected. He's won a lot of awards. I met one of his colleagues in Rome, of all places, who spoke very highly of him. The man is a psychopath. He is a moral psychopath, though. He came out of a loving, supportive family, and so his attachment to other human beings is not emotional. It is intellectual. That sounds strange to us, but if you think about the origins of the modern intellectual tradition in philosophy, what the philosophers were trying to do is develop arguments not based on emotion, not based on cultural tradition, myths, and superstitions, but based on pure rational thinking. And so it sounds strange, but that's what he is. He is a philosophical, moral psychopath. And for what it's worth, this will probably interest you. I think I found another one in history, which was Schindler, of Schindler's List. If you read his actual biography and sort of look away from the movie, his early life, he fit the characteristics of psychopathy very, very strongly. And yet, later in his life, he began saving Jews, which is fascinating because he started off exploiting them. He prostituted out some of the women. He really was a slave driver. Something changed in him, and he became, I believe, a moral psychopath.
So what are the qualities of a psychopath?
That's a really good question, because if I spend a lot of time reading, there are a lot of different criteria, and they don't agree. If you go back to the original American work on it by a guy named Herv Cleckley at the University of Georgia, and I think he had it right. A psychopath is really someone who lacks emotion. They don't have emotional attachments to other people, and they're not even necessarily attached to themselves. They will take risks. They will do crazy things. The modern idea of a psychopath, I use the word in the book, as I comment in the book, snappiness sells. But in the modern world, it's become conflated with criminal psychopathy, which has a lot of other things mixed in it. But at basis, the psychopath just doesn't. He has a blunted emotional affect. And in fact, there's some speculation that the reason that some psychopaths become sadists is just trying to feel anything. That extreme excitement, horrific as it is, they at least feel something. So that's your psychopath. On top of that, I need to explain is the narcissist. I've been asked by a number of people on different shows, is Trump a narcissist? He is, and so is almost everybody else in Washington. He is an unvarnished narcissist. And the only recent president I can think of who was probably not a narcissist was also one of our least effective presidents, which was Carter.
Yeah, I was going to mention Carter. Yeah.
Yeah. And so it appears that if you're going to play that game, You need to understand the game. You have to have sharp elbows and tough ribs. Um, and so these are not people like you and me. They play a different game. The last two things you look at, there's the dark tetrad, which is the malignant narcissist, the people like Ted Bundy or
Hmm.
the Ripper or those people. The last two are sadism and Machiavellianism, which is just a cold, goal-driven person.
So is there a relationship then, you may have mentioned this, between, say, somebody who is a psychotic and a narcissist?
There's certainly, it gets really confusing when you dig in, and I spent a lot of the book talking about it. There's a lot of conflation in some of the diagnostic criteria between the two. Modern criteria for psychopathy contain a lot of narcissism, I believe. I'm not an expert. I'm just looking at the different
Hmm.
criteria. And vice versa. There is the assumption that narcissism often contains a lot of psychopathy. The thing we need to understand is that there are people who are primarily interested in themselves, have a very limited, if any, connection to other human beings, and a very limited compassion for them.
I mean,
And
that sort of describes a psychotic by the definition that you provided. I mean, somebody who is detached, from emotion, who cannot feel for others, who cannot empathize. I mean,
that's true.
yeah, yeah.
The one thing that the Klecklian psychopath, as they would call him, lacks, however, is there is no real interest in promoting himself. He
Okay.
or she will just kind of go along. They'll commit petty crimes, but then become bored with it. And I read one, a guy stole a car and then just abandoned it. They
Hmm.
will participate in major crimes if someone else recruits them,
Hmm.
but they just have a blunted affect. So the narcissist is the one who's really interested in him or herself. The psychopath, like I said, will take risks because doesn't really care, apparently, it looks like, much more about himself than he cares about other people.
So, just out of curiosity, I mean, I know that looking back in history, from ancient to modern history, who is the worst psychopath, and who's the worst narcissist? And if they're both in the same person,
There's some horrific people. I
yeah.
spent a quarter of the book looking at conquerors and kings through history and tried to be an equal opportunity offender. I
Mm-hmm.
included Shaka Zulu from Africa, Atahualpa from the New World, Asians and Europeans,
Mm-hmm.
uh, things that happened in Tanzania and, of course, the United States, including the Pilgrims. The worst. It depends on what you consider the worst. Genghis Khan slaughtered from Asia all the way into Western Europe and was just a remorseless butcher. But do we equate him with a Hitler who also included a certain hatred of his enemy? Genghis Khan didn't have that racism. He didn't have that zealotry. He was just out to conquer. And then do you compare them to someone like Pol Pot or Idi Amin, where there's also just an intense sadism? We don't see a lot of sadism. There's all of them indulge in it. The worst, I can tell you this, the second greatest conqueror in history, the one who conquered the most, was Genghis Khan. But the greatest conqueror in history was a doughty grandmother who is still thought very well of, which is Victoria. Under her, the English conquered much more of the world than Genghis Khan conquered. Now, she did not direct it,
Mm-hmm.
but, you know, the Nuremberg defense, an order is an order, does not hold. She was the monarch, and she made fabulous amounts of money over the British slaughter of the world. There are only 3 or 4 countries in the world that Great Britain has not invaded, and they're small countries, and they're landlocked.
Interesting. So moving forward, I guess in time in modern history, has say the environment anyway, has that say enhanced or reduced the prospects of being a psychopath and the prospects of being in this case, I guess, a narcissist?
They're still there, and one of my later on in the book I point out that they moved into the corporation. What did happen,
Right.
and as a lawyer you'll find this part interesting, is that in 1776 a group of men designed a system. As a lawyer you would look at it one way, and historians would look at it a slightly different way. I look at it as a biologist and a game theorist because my area of evolutionary biology includes a lot of that. And what they did, the founding fathers, that made the largest difference was that they restrained the psychopaths and the narcissists. They limited them. They held them back. And what emerged was a middle class that began inventing and creating and building. One of the strengths of America is that we have never been invaded with any in any substantial way. And so we've continued on that. And then the high point of Western civilization, the Marshall Plan, rebuilds Europe, rebuilds our enemies, but it also sends all these young men and women off to college and strengthens that middle class yet again. And that led to the Pax Americana. That, from my standpoint, is what the Constitution did. So did the environment change? Well, yeah, the founders changed the environment, and that changed the modern world.
Let me think about that for a second. So you're saying 1776. I mean, that's the date that you
That's
gave.
a turning point in history. You can find roots for it in the Renaissance,
Mm-hmm.
and as I said, it continues up to the Marshall Plan. But the peril of the modern world is that these people are returning. They are returning to the increased power that they had. We have Putin, we have Erdogan, we have
Mm-hmm.
al-Assad, we have Duterte, and you can just keep going around the world and see the rise of these right-wing despots.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we'll get to that in a second. So I'm just, again, I'm thinking out loud, and that is that you said that, at least I believe that you said that I guess the urge or the tendency to be, I guess, psychotic or nihilistic or uh, has actually been suppressed, and that was that an internal suppression or external?
It was
And
a political suppression, beginning in 200
sure, sure.
and we began pushing those people back. They were always suppressed in the lower classes, right? The criminal, there's this,
Mm-hmm.
one of the quotes I have is that a pirate who appears before Alexander says, why with one ship am I called a pirate and you with a fleet are called emperor?
Mm-hmm.
Because they're playing the same game. But it's just like, and the first chapter compares kings to gangsters running protection rackets, which is what the king is. We look at the cartoons of Hagar the Horrible. The tax collector comes and he's got the executioner behind him, and we chuckle. No, that is the king's game. Pay him the protection money or he kills you or ruins you.
Mm-hmm.
And that's all the king starts out being. So anyway, getting back to what you were discussing, what our founders did that was remarkable, they looked at it a different way, but it was equally valid, is they suppressed the suppressors.
Mm-hmm.
They stopped the bullies, and that allowed people the autonomy to work harder. There wasn't a lot of innovation at first, but with time allowed the freedom for innovation and for many people to contribute. And the idea that it's an idea we see today, isn't that only the upper classes or the white people can come up with really good ideas. Only the white people work hard. Only the white
Mm-hmm.
people. And we look all around. I just read my daughter, The Queen of Katwe, about nearly illiterate girl who comes out of the slums of Kampala in Uganda, who is, I think she is now a grandmaster in chess. She is just a natural talent. Genius is everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
When you get rid of the bullies, when you get rid of the kings, when you get rid of the people who would steal from us in one way or another, our lives or our possessions or our ideas, genius just emerges spontaneously.
Mhm.
That's why we're seeing it all over the world now.
So you include corporations, and so obviously, I guess people would say, "Are you a communist?" and
No,
therefore
no.
not like corporations, or you just recognize that they are the bullies. I'm trying to get the
Good
connection.
point. Good question. I do need to clarify that. Let me make sure I know that you draw a wide spectrum of political listeners, readers, and watchers. So personally, what I am is someone who strongly believes in a capitalist framework that has pockets of socialism, that there are things that the government must do because there's not sufficient drive in the private sector to do it or do it to an effective level. The corporation attracts the narcissists and the Machiavellians, sometimes the sadists. But what we need to understand about the corporation is the corporation itself is a psychopath. It is unfeeling. It lives for profit. The CEO of a corporation may be a fine man at home, but just like when the general puts on his helmet, when the CEO steps behind his desk, he makes very ruthless, hard-headed decisions. And just as the king will send people out to die and to kill, the general will send people to kill and die, so the CEO may make decisions that cost other people their health, their wealth, and their lives.
Mm-hmm. But the CEO actually has a fiduciary responsibility. There's no fiduciary responsibility that a person would have within himself.
Not necessarily, but they may have the drive. And before the corporation exists and that fiduciary responsibility, you have some, we call them visionaries, but some entrepreneur who, I won't go into how often, but who frequently is extremely greedy and extremely narcissistic.
Mm-hmm.
We've both known a lot of wealthy people, and when you've gotten to know them, what you really, their only talent was greed and a basic intellect. But they were just greedy and willing to twist people to get what they wanted.
And willing to be a narcissist.
No, they are narcissists.
But I mean, willing to be more of a narcissist. I mean, that's one of the. I mean, I'm just thinking in my mind some of the people I know that I think that you're describing. Probably thinking two different or a number of different people. But the one quality that I see, at least, that is that it's all about them.
Well, and as an attorney, I should be interviewing you. How much of your time and your contractual efforts are trying to parse out disagreements between two narcissists,
Mm-hmm.
or between a narcissist and an unsuspecting victim? There would be many fewer lawyers if there weren't so many narcissists in the world. Lawyers see an aspect of humanity that very few people see. You guys watch families fall apart. You watch corporations and partnerships fall apart, often over money, sometimes over power and other.
Certainly over lives. I mean, there's no question about that, whether it's money or power. So you mentioned Donald Trump, and so I didn't want to move too far afield, and I think it's time to now bring him into the picture.
Okay.
So how would you describe him?
Oh, he's a full-blown narcissist, and the without a doubt, Donald Trump is a strong narcissist, and everything is about him. It's going to be interesting to see if he will throw his own children under the bus. He will regret it if he does, but I suspect he would. Maybe not Barron. Barron might be I've watched, and these are purely intuitive things. He seems to have a stronger feeling for Barron. But he is a narcissist. He does all the things they do. And the question, we asked the wrong question or maybe not the wrong question, we don't ask enough questions, because what we need to ask is, why are people attracted to someone like that? Why, when they are obviously lying, do people still believe them and support them? And the answer, and this is where my biological training comes in, the answer is, I think, very simple. For 10,000 years, if the king said he was a god, you agreed with him, because if you didn't agree with him, he killed you. And so you didn't just agree with him. The safest course, the one that led to the highest rates of survival, was not to agree, but to believe him. And people throughout history believe him. And even today, it's Kim Jong-il. Yeah, there are three in that dynasty. I'm trying to keep them separate. Kim Jong-il, not only bowled a perfect game his first trial, hit I forget how many holes in one the first time on the golf course. He was an expert on the internet in a country which has almost no internet, expert on film in a country that has almost no electricity. And according to the official state organs, he never defecated. And we think that's hilarious, but the people in that country believed it. This is the great vulnerability of humanity. We have 10,000 years of breeding that says, attach yourself to the strongest person you can find. And every time the media try to take on Donald Trump and do not take him down, every time he is rude and no one forces him to apologize, he is proving to his supporters that he is strong.
Mm-hmm.
And in fact, what several of us talked about at the conference I mentioned to you that I was at last week at the National Press Club, is that what we need to do is convince Trump's supporters not that he is an evil man or a dishonest man, but that he's a weak man. He was afraid to go serve in Vietnam, where Mueller did, and McCain did. He exploits other people, which isn't what the strong people do. He cheats on his wife, which is not what a strong man does. He lies, which is not what a strong man does. He brags and blusters and talks about himself incessantly, which is not what a strong man does. He's a weak man. And that's what his supporters, once they see that, I think that's when they will back off from him.
You know, I'm thinking one of the real qualities of life, I think, is to be able to admit fault, you know, to admit responsibility, to just acknowledge to the world that you failed. To me, that's a real strength.
Yes,
you know,
absolutely.
But people do that, and he cannot do that.
He never does it. He never backs down. And let me just go a little bit afield just for a second. I can turn any liberal into a conservative, but I can turn any conservative into a liberal. If I took a group of liberals and said, look, you're entering a situation where there's not going to be enough food for everyone to survive, and either you decide that you and your family will survive and others don't, or others will decide it for you. And some liberals will say, well, then my family and I will just die. And my response will be, that's your choice, but that behavior will not survive to the next generation. On the other hand, if I took conservatives and put them in a business environment where innovation was moving very rapidly, and the only way their business would survive is to hire innovative people, they would say, sure, I'll do that. And then you go to them and say, there's a shortage of innovative people. You're going to have to hire foreigners and people with accents and Muslims and women and gays and lesbians. They might say, then I'm going out of business, but it's exactly the same response as I had for the liberal. That's your choice, but that behavior and your genes will not make it to the next generation. My point is that there are two situations of humanity, sufficiency and insufficiency. We can't imagine insufficiency because basically for the past 70 years, we've lived more comfortably than the kings of France. But for almost all of humanity and for the history of the world, life is insufficiency. Every wild animal you see is very close to starvation. They are struggling. They are one injury away from failing and dying. And this continues into the modern period. And so what we have is this history that, it's me or you. And it's only in the past few years that or a few centuries even, that this idea you just mentioned, that the good man, the strong man, even the great man admits his faults. But you can see that if progress was very slow until 1776, admitting your faults wasn't important because nobody was going anywhere. But since 1776, the ability to create, the ability to recover from your mistakes, what are all the entrepreneurs who say, fail, fail, fail until you succeed. That's what the experimentation is about. That's what progress is about. And so this modern ethos, not a beating on your chest as the king did,
Mm-hmm.
but saying it's my fault, as we designed the president to say, and as most presidents do say, or I was in error, is the corrective. That is how you design the future, is constantly learning from your mistakes, moving forward. But if we go to a period of insufficiency, then we go to a period in which progress stops, and it no longer becomes a good to say, I was wrong. It becomes good to say, I'm going to survive.
Sure. Yeah. So I'm thinking that Donald Trump, as we mentioned, at least in my opinion, he never admits that he's wrong, fault, responsibility, as I stated a few minutes ago, and yet we all know that he is constantly doing something wrong, yet his ardent followers are always so forgiving. So it's like the antithesis of who he is. I mean, they are in a sense that, they absorb what he doesn't have. And maybe I'm not articulating it exactly the way I want to, but he is, he is the yin to their yang, and vice versa.
Yes, exactly. And I'm sure at some point in your practice, you have dealt with people who were codependent, with
Mm-hmm.
someone who was exploitive or abusive.
Right.
In a lot of ways, a lot of employees are like that. They are constantly abused. They are constantly mistreated. And yet they will defend their bosses. There
Mm-hmm.
is I'm blanking right now, but the Stockholm syndrome, where the hostage is
Mm-hmm.
identified with the hostage takers.
Right.
Patty Hearst, who identified with the hostage takers, and you will see this: the person who is horribly abused, who is horribly mistreated, and they stay loyal to their abuser and will do almost anything their abuser tells them to do. So this is the dysfunction. And right now, you mentioned Trump's followers. One of my concerns is he's gaslighting the whole nation.
Mm-hmm.
He has said for so long, I am right, and anyone who criticizes him is wrong and is a liar, and it's a lie. And you repeat it often enough, and it wasn't exactly what Goering said, but the idea that you repeat a lie
Mm-hmm.
often enough, it becomes the truth. And I'm very concerned because I think I see it among moderates and liberals. We are starting to buy into that. We are starting to defend him. And I'm seeing it in a number of ways. You see a lot of whataboutism. I saw a comment, you may have seen on NPR, there was a comment that the Pope questioned Trump's Christianity.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And a friend of mine, a liberal, raised Catholic, said, well, the Pope needs to, has his own problems. He needs to take care of the priest pedophile case. And I thought, oh my gosh, this is just what Trump's supporters do. The joke has become, what about her emails? No matter what you tell them, what about her emails? And it's this whataboutism. So on one side of the aisle, you have this long, rotting smorgasbord
Mm-hmm.
of just horrific things out of Trump, not just dishonesties and treacheries and lies and cheating and stealing and felonies.
Mm-hmm.
And all of his people are lined up over there, and they'll say, oh, look, you have that napkin out of place. So you can't
Sure.
criticize us. And we're all getting sucked into it. We're starting, it's just like they hammered on Hillary and convinced enough people that she was a crook. She's a politician by definition, that involves some crookedness. But she is no worse, I don't think, than any of the other people. She is smarter. She's either really smart or her persecutors are really dumb because they could never catch her at anything.
Right, but in that case, I think what happened was what she did was she allowed her husband to be put in a situation where um, there was an inherent conflict of interest between what he was doing, whether it was good for the world or not, and what she was doing. And because their nexus was so close, it allowed the world to say, well, I mean, how dare your husband make money or do this while you're Secretary of State? I mean, if he was making money bowling, that's one thing. But if he's making money off Russia or Russians and she's doing business with Russians as a government official, that's a totally different situation. And I would have thought, now I had this conversation with somebody on Facebook recently. I said, you know, I would have thought that Trump would have learned from from Hillary, from the claims that he has made against her. And I would have thought that Trump's followers would have recognized, wait a minute, this is a catastrophe. The environment is a catastrophe if you have conflicts of interest, such as the one I've described with Bill and Hillary. And I got to tell you, and I'm sure that you know, those conflicts are, I believe, I mean, I think they're immense as it comes to Donald Trump, his family, his businesses. I mean, just the Trump Tower Moscow by itself is, I mean, had that happened with anybody else, I mean, that is, to me, the worst offense, honestly, truly, the worst offense that I have seen for anybody running for any major office president. I mean, there's no way that there's just no way that people can look at that and say, oh, well, no, he has a right to do this because he's a businessman, international businessman, and he's right to do that because it's not against the law. Okay, so shut up. You know, but excuse me. Yeah.
The problem, Steve, the law attracts a certain kind of intellect, one that is critical and logical, and then it sharpens that intellect. And medical school does that to a certain degree. That does not describe the people you're trying to understand. You are saying, why aren't these people logical? And you mentioned early on, and those were excellent points, that you would have thought Trump would have learned. But one thing we have learned is that Trump never learns. Mm-hmm. He still can't stick to his speaking points. He still can't exert discipline. He still can't put away that Twitter account. He still can't stop stumbling over himself. And to be honest with you, I am grateful that he doesn't, because if he were a smart man, mm-hmm. I think he would own the government now. He would have grabbed control of everything, but he keeps stumbling over himself. And so he has a certain kind of of intelligence for certain kinds of things, but overall he's not an intelligent man. His only strategy is push, and wheedle and deal.
Pardon me. That's, yeah, no question about that. So last question I have is, where do you think, based upon what you're talking about, you know, a narcissist, a pathological person, you know, where is Trump going to take us as a community? I know this is a projection, but, you know, based upon just the economy of today, just the culture and society, and based upon who he is and what he has done and the makeup that he has, you know, where are we going to be, say, in 2 years or another 6 years once he's gone?
Well, I'll answer that as best. You know, we're you know.
Sure, it's a projection. Sure, I understand.
Hypothetical, but he might start a war. and he might launch a nuclear weapon as a way of getting the reelection. We need to keep that in mind, and he might, as much as he's allowed to, increase the police state. It's not too bad yet, but we can all see evidence that it could get there quickly. And so I think those are all within the realm of possibility of him grabbing more power. What's holding him back is even the senators are telling him, even senators who are backing him are still respectful enough of the law, I think, that they've told him to back off. Let me throw out an idea you may not have considered.
Mm-hmm.
Say Trump were impeached tomorrow and thrown out of office. Say he doesn't get reelected in 2 years. Say he doesn't get reelected, or he finally terms out in 6 years. He's not going away. His supporters aren't going away.
Mm-hmm.
In some ways, he will be freer to go out and rouse the rabble and preach his hatred and his venom. He will say and do anything for the roar of the crowd and for the support of his followers. And so when he steps down and leaves there, unless he goes to jail, and I don't think either one of us thinks that could happen in any probable situation, he's not going anywhere. He is going to continue harming this country for decades, or for however long he lives. Now, the good news is somebody brought up that Pelosi didn't want to impeach him. So obviously he's innocent, and first of all, she didn't have the votes in the Senate. But I point out, there's another reason Pelosi doesn't want to impeach him. He's driving people to the Democratic Party. With him in office, every day is Christmas for the Democrats. They're watching red states flip to blue. Will this next election flip Texas? Beto O'Rourke shocked the country, but you and I are both aware that the Democrats have been, for 15 years now, thinking they could flip Texas,
Mm-hmm.
and they're getting closer every year. So you've got two opposing forces clashing, and what you and I also realize as students of history is we look back on the American Revolution, we look back on the Civil War, we look back on World War II, and we teach our kids, yes, we went in and we won. But the student of history is aware that in all of those, and in many other points in our history, people were really afraid we might not survive. So we're going through another gauntlet. It's a bad time. It's a scary time. If it works out the way we hope it works out, I think America could actually emerge stronger than it was before.
Or, one of the things that I think of all the time lately is that we will not emerge. We will actually divide. The anger, the hatred, in part because of what preceded Trump, but largely because of him. I just don't know how we're going to be able to manage that. I just don't. I really don't.
I'm not sure either, but as I mentioned at the founding of this country, it freed the middle class to put out solutions, and no one could have foreseen the solutions. And so we have to have a little bit of faith in our fellow Americans, faith in the human spirit, and I mean not some sacred way, but to find solutions, to innovate, to persevere. You may be right. I'm scared. I can't see it, but I'm also aware that nobody could see the things that came that solved the problems of the past.
Mm-hmm. So how can somebody purchase the Kings, Conquerors, and Psychopaths book?
It's available through the UL Press, ulpress.org, or through Amazon. One of these days, I'm hoping I can get it on Barnes and Noble, but everything takes time.
Gotcha. Well, thank you. I really do appreciate it. It's been a very enlightening conversation. It really has been. We've gone through history from the beginning to hopefully not the end.
Yeah. Well, thank you for having me. It's really, I've been a fan and followed you for quite a while.
Thank you. I appreciate it.